This week, I had the pleasure of speaking with Alex Genov, Head of Marketing Insights and Customer Research at Zappos. Alex brings rich academic background from his time researching experimental social psychology to the fast-paced world of business. We discussed the natural tension between deliberate, methodical academic research and its application in the fast-paced business environment, which needs to prove its ROI more than anything. We also looked at how the human aspect of research in qualitative studies often gets overlooked. And as Alex suggests, the key is fine-tuning the balance between qualitative and quantitative, taking the time to understand where your company's limits and your customers' needs meet. And that's where you'll find the truly practical, scalable solutions, something that taking a cold average of human experience could never accomplish. This was a really insightful conversation, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Hello, and welcome back to Customer Experience, Voices of Customer Experience podcast. We're on season 10, and today I am joined by Alex Genov from Zappos. Alex, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, tell our listeners and viewers about who you are, what you do, and what you're truly passionate about.
Thank you so much, Mary. It's such a pleasure to be with you this morning and to chat about CX and customers and so on. My background is in experimental social psychology. And I studied psychology for many, many years, not because I wanted to study for so many years, but I wanted to preserve my legal status in the US. So that's how I ended up with a PhD in social psychology. But it really served me well through the years when I started applying it to the business world. And what I brought with me from the academic side was this deeper understanding of customers. My focus was on emotions, how they get generated, how you measure them, how you define them. Also the basic experimental method, of course, but also individual differences. And that was a big focus of mine, of my work in academia, and I brought this over to the business side. And so that background has really defined my approach in customer research, in usability, in market research, and so on. And it's really the belief that customers are different, and especially for companies with millions of customers, you cannot treat them the same. I also learned a lot from really intellectual giants like Professor Peter Fader, who is considered the godfather of customer centricity. I learned a lot from him, and that's what I'm trying to apply in my work at Zappos currently, but also other companies prior.
That's awesome. We had Pete Fader on our first season of this podcast, in fact. And he was the one that kind of kicked off my interest into customer centricity. We also interviewed and worked closely with a colleague of his, Professor Dan McCarthy, who's here in Emory in Atlanta. So he's local. And both brilliant minds with great perspective, a lot of focus on customer lifetime value, and in truly creating valuation of companies based on the loyalty of their customers. So very, very interesting approach. It's interesting to hear that you share some of their teachings. Now, I have looked at some of your work and I know a little bit about what you preach, and I'm going to try to lead you down that path with my questions. But before that, did you find when you were leaving academia and stepping into the business world, did you find that you were kind of fighting an uphill battle, or that you had to kind of fight your way through under some perhaps friendly fire, even inside of organizations of people who perhaps didn't agree with what you stood behind?
That's a fantastic question, Mary. This is great. You're probably you're a great interviewer, I have to say.
We just started.
Exactly, and it's already exceeded my expectations. No, I've thought a lot about it, and I also have covered this a little bit in a recent book that I co-wrote with a couple of co-authors. But it's a great question because I think people have to realize that academic research and research within business organizations are two very different ball games, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a while when I started in the business world. I brought a lot of that academic mindset with me, and I had a tough time. And it was me, because I didn't realize the tension between research in a practical, fast-paced environment and the academic research. And again, the rules are very different, right? It's
Yeah.
if you apply the academic rigor, any research project would take a couple of years, and it would cost a lot of money. And by the time you come up with the results, business would have moved,
Yeah.
years ahead. So it was my growing into understanding those differences, and partly it's also how you teach organizations that do not, first of all, appreciate uh, the necessary rigor, but also organizations where leadership and others know just enough to not be dangerous, but to um, to require some more education and some
Mm-hmm.
more elaboration on what the differences are. And I think you need to, the most successful organizations, I would say, have a really great blend of practicality and also some application of rigor.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's this, to me, it's all about balance. On the one hand, you cannot just go by gut feel, which of course is years of experience and so on, but it's a lot of biases too. So if you go by that alone, you may be very successful, but you may be very unsuccessful.
It's kind of
Um,
you're tossing the dice, right? You don't really
exactly,
know. Yeah.
exactly. And if you're too academically oriented, then you're going to be slow and it's going to be expensive and so on. So it's this fine balance. But it's I really love that question. Thank you.
Well, the thing is that as I was kind of looking at your background and the background of so many other people, I always try to bring a mix of academics and practitioners on this podcast. And that's one thing that we realized when you're in the line of fire, you do have to move very, very quickly. But other than that, there seems to be a lot of pressure on practitioners, on people who are executing inside of organizations to provide the results that the company has their heart set on, regardless of what comes in through the research, right? So there
Right.
are times that leadership in an organization simply doesn't apply certain insights because it doesn't fit their agenda, and I have found that that's a bit frustrating for
Right.
a lot of people.
Exactly. So this is a that's a question of course, integrity,
Hmm.
business integrity, research integrity, and it's many times it's not done intentionally. It's not
Hmm.
nefarious. Many times it's because of these biases, because of pressure to deliver results, of course,
Yeah.
and many times it's done subconsciously. But I think it is very important to educate organizations about the basics of research, about the difference between qualitative research and quantitative research,
Hmm.
and to really discourage the use of data to just support a point of view.
Right.
There is a really funny cartoon of this drunk guy leaning against a lamppost, and the tagline is "Please don't use statistics like a drunk man uses a lamppost for support, not for illumination." So I encourage organizations to use analytics and insights as illumination, not just support.
That's amazing. I love that. That was fantastic. Um, when it comes down to it, bringing that qualitative insight into the picture is so important. And I know that this is something that you talk about a lot because it has to do with looking at customers as people, right? So it has to do with being curious about the why and not just the what's, the when's, and the how's. So can you share a little bit about that vision with me about this mistake that's so very frequent, especially like you said, in corporations that have millions of customers, where we tend to just look at the cold analytics and forget about the human.
Absolutely, Mary. This is that's so important. And again, going back to the idea of balance, it may sound like a cliche, but it's important to recognize when the balance is off kilter. And nowadays, I think this fascination with data science, analytics, big data, just because the technology allows us to collect so much data and to analyze it at scale. I believe, to get a little philosophical here, I think we're going through these cycles. Society is going through these cycles, and back in the day, there was fascination with machines, right?
Mm-hmm.
During the Industrial Revolution, and it was all about machines. Machines were going to save everything, right? And the cogs and even the human brain was depicted as these cogs moving around, and it was so predictable and it was so comforting to know that you press a lever and something comes out and you can control it. Well, I think we're back at that stage, but now the machines are ones and zeros. The machines are the software and the algorithms and so on. And because I think a lot of business is driven by these quarterly results, and we need to businesses are based on numbers and results. It's really, I think, easier and more comforting to go to the spreadsheets and to base everything on that. And then when it comes to operations and inputs and outputs, that's fine. But when it comes to people, it starts to get tricky. Just like in your intro, you mentioned that it's so tricky, and it becomes absurd at some point if you think about it when you start trying to average humans and human experience.
Yeah. Now, do you think that there is a way to bring that human element in, even for organizations at scale? Because one of the main issues and one of the reasons that I believe a lot of companies end up going to that extreme of analytics where they're ignoring the qualitative side is because it's simple, it's straightforward, it's scalable, it's cheap.
All right.
So it ends up being a lot more practical. So, like you said, when it's about finding that balance, how is it that we provide a practical application of this into our voice of customer programs and organizations that have millions of customers?
Sure, Mary. Yeah, I think it's one of those, that question of scalability is a really interesting one, and I think it's one of those areas where it's a mindset that's limiting, and it's also can be misleading in this. And I'll give you an example. You're probably familiar with this really famous Airbnb example of one of the ways why Airbnb grew and was so successful was because of something that was not deemed scalable initially. So when I don't know if you've probably heard of the story where they were trying to figure out what listings are more successful than other listings, and they isolated the quality of the photos of the places, right, that were the defining variable. And so initially they somebody thought, well, it's not scalable, but luckily for them, they said, well, we'll figure out a way around it, and they would send professional photographers and whatnot, but they figured out how to scale it. But if they had dismissed this idea based on just whether it's scalable at a first glance, then they wouldn't probably be where they are right now. So I think the same thing applies to anything. If just understanding customers as humans on a qualitative level, it's on a psychological level, it's this research is doable and it's done in many organizations, and it doesn't. So the qualitative research, it's about coming up with insights, uncovering insights. It's not about quantify them. That's where quantitative research comes in afterwards. So by definition, qualitative research is not scalable in a way, right? You do the qualitative research to uncover insights, and then you quantify to see if it's viable for the business. So it's always this interplay between qualitative and quantitative. But I think the takeaway here from this kind of question is, um, do you dismiss ideas or approaches just because at the first glance they don't seem scalable? I think that's a very misguided approach.
Yeah. Well, full disclosure, the company that I work for, Worthix, we do, in fact, scale qualitative and blend it with quantitative to be able to get these insights and then create a practical application for them inside a business, exactly like you said. So a lot of it does have to do with understanding how technology can somehow augment
Absolutely.
humans and what we're able to create to
Sure.
provide us with the skills and the ability to do things that were previously unthinkable, right?
Absolutely, and I did look at Vortex, and it's really intriguing. That we can talk later more about a possible application and so on. But I agree with you. It can be you first start, you know, with an experiment or with trying to figure things out, and then you can scale for sure.
Yeah. Now, this idea, Alex, that people have, that what are some of the that you call customer centric myths that people believe, but when it comes down to the practical aspect of it, it's absolutely unrealistic. And what would that reality look like? Are there a couple ideas that come to mind?
Sure. No, no, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's they're unthinkable or not put in practice, but they take away from this idea of understanding customers as people, and they keep us grounded in this idea that numbers are going to solve everything,
Hmm.
and limit organizations to this inside out thinking, right?
Right.
Where um, so one example is from retail. Retailers talk about multi-channel, different channels, and I think it's such an innovative thought that we need to integrate the channels now, and then the brick and mortar channel with the digital channel, and they try to integrate it, and they talk about channel optimization. But then when you go talk to customers and say what are the Nordstrom channels, they're gonna ask you like, what do Nordstrom now? Do they have like a TV show now? They don't know what channels are, and that's the problem. Is this is operations inside out thinking, which is necessary when it comes to operations. But when you stop there and don't take the perspective of the customer, you're not going to be able to. It's not about integrating. It's about because the whole idea of integration is this, our main business and brick and mortar. Now we have to do this digital thing because everybody's online. So, right, we need to do it. But and then it's kind of maybe purchasing a third party tool and trying to make it work and trying to make the data work. Instead, if you step back and say we're gonna take the view of the customer, and customers don't care about channels, you may wake up in the morning and open up your phone and look at a pair of shoes and say these look cute, and I'm gonna go try them in the store, and you buy them in the store, but then you want to return them online and so on. You don't think of channels. You don't say I'm gonna explore the Nordstrom brick and mortar channel. So that's one of those myths. Is this, when you optimize the channels, everything is gonna happen seamlessly. And then the other one is just this idea that you can create an average experience, and we can talk about families with 2.4 children, and we can talk about a lot of those examples that
Female suburban dwellers that have a dog and two children. That's the
right.
classic one, right?
Right. Well, 2.4 actually, right? Because average them, it ends up being 2.4, and then you'll try to find the point 4 child. And but then it's everywhere. This idea, the body mass index, for example, right? It's a very easy number, right? It's a
Hmm.
number, Well, I've tried that. I've opened up the body mass index calculator. I've typed in my height and weight, and I come out as obese.
Yes.
And then I get, no, I kid you not, it's obese. And then I started getting these, watch out your blood pressure. You may have diabetes, on and on. But and again, it was I don't know how many people know, but this was developed by not by a biologist, by a statistician who had created a very simple math formula. But when you put it in practice, it works for some, but doesn't work for others.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm into fitness. I'm a weightlifter. People who have been listening to this podcast for a while follow a bit of my fitness story. So that was the perfect example to use for me, because I have this issue all the time. I'm very tall and I'm very big built, but I've got a lot of muscle. So I constantly have to ignore the BMI, and it's hard to do because at this point we're programmed by the media, by fitness programs, by everything to constantly be focused on BMI. And it's so particular to each individual and to your composition and to what you do and to where you live and to what you eat and all of these elements, your daily routine, all of these elements affect so much, right? Yet we use this number. And to so many people, I mean, there's some people who really don't care and who just like, I'm obese. But for other people, this is extremely detrimental to their mental health. For instance, people who have body dysmorphia or eating disorders, they can be very harmed by this blanket number that was perhaps created with the best intentions, like you said, not nefarious at all, but ends up having consequences because of these blind spots, right?
Right. Exactly. And exactly. If you don't understand how this is calculated, and then you don't understand the fact that muscle weighs and bone weighs, and so it's really becomes a inaccurate number. I mean, if you ask me, it should be called the BSI index, but BSI, But no, I don't. I mean, I don't want to really make too much fun of it, but that's one example of many. I mean, you can come with many more practical examples, and everyday examples are come from marketing. And I mean, I'll share another personal story, which again averages everybody. We were last year in the process of purchasing a new home here in Vegas, and it's a very stressful, process. You have to apply for mortgage, you have to deal with your credit score, and so on. And so we applied, and we started the process through this mortgage company, and then one day I get this email with the subject line is something to the effect of now credit score of 600 or something like this, and I just froze, and I'm like, what? Because my credit score was excellent, it was above 820 or 8 something. And then I just froze. It's like, is my credit score low? I mean, I freaked out, really. And then I read a little bit into the body of the email, and it was, this company was bragging now that they help now people with credit scores of 600, right? But I mean, I honestly, I freaked out, and I was going to start calling them. But what they had done is they sent out to all their customers, regardless of their credit score, this email that they thought it was great. Now we cover people with really poor credit scores.
Yeah.
Yay. Right? But that's again
it could, if you think of it, it could have been somewhat easy for marketing to check in with the CRM, perhaps, and only target a specific
Why not?
group of customers, right? I mean, this is the practical aspect of it. It truly is. It's the operational side of it. And it just goes to show how many details and how many moving parts, especially in really, really large organizations. To me, when I consider a company the size of, say, Amazon, or Zappos, it's just helping so many people throughout one day. It's so daunting to me, for somebody to have the job of overseeing and orchestrating all of those moving parts to create a perfect experience, So I understand why leaders would get attached to a number that that would make it simple, right? If I have so much responsibility and there's 5 minutes of my day that I could pay attention to looking at how customer experience is going, I want to be able to look at a hard number and scale that to my boss or to my shareholders or to whomever and say, oh, we're doing better or we're doing worse, right? That kind of thermometer, let's say, would be
Sure,
helpful.
sure.
Is that a mistake?
I, that's a fantastic question, Mary. I don't think it is. So going back to Professor Peter Fader's teachings, customer centricity is about understanding that not all customers are the same, and then treating your very best customers in a very special way. But he also contrasts customer centricity with product centricity, and one of his very important points is that product centricity is the dominant business model nowadays, and many excellent, some of the best companies are product centric, right? They have the best product out there, nobody can touch them, they have the best operations, they achieve the best outcomes for the customer, and nobody can come close. So they can be excellent being product centric, that's perfectly fine, right? But if you're a company that cannot really
You
play
have
or
like a commoditized
right.
offering, right?
But if you cannot get in that space, and it's much harder nowadays because of globalization, because of a lot of factors, information, people can order products from around the globe, and it's
Yep.
much harder to achieve that. I mean, Ford, the Model F or whatever was the Model T was this. This was the only object like that in the market,
Yeah.
and then the company's goal, the only goal is to spread the word to as many people as possible, and you don't have to tailor the message. It says we have the Model T, it's better than a horse, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the message. I mean, Apple is one of those companies. Steve Jobs is famous for saying, I think he's misunderstood in the sense that he was not against market research, but he didn't see the need to segment customers and treat customers differently,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in that respect, he stuck to. I mean, this is a product-centric company, the best product out there. Nobody can. They have a fan base like no one else. Why segment in a way, right?
Right.
So that's I think it's a complex issue, but I think if you want to create a business based on customer loyalty, then you have to go beyond the numbers. And
Yeah.
again, if you have to, numbers are necessary. We cannot, of course, we cannot drop analytics and numbers. That's a big part of business runs on numbers. That's a given. That's fine. But what I'm saying is you need to provide some balance, and you need to pay some more attention to the human side of things as well.
You talked about Ford just now with their Model T, and what instantly came to mind to me was Tesla, in fact. And
Oh yeah,
Tesla for so
same,
long, they had no challengers, right? It was just them.
same.
When it came to electric vehicles, it was them or like the Nissan Leaf. Nobody wanted that, or Max the Prius. That wasn't competition to Tesla, right? They had a luxury electric vehicle and they were the only ones. And for so many years, they truly were the only ones, and they rode that innovation in the
Right,
product for so long. But now every single auto dealer, every OEM is manufacturing electric vehicles. And what you have are manufacturers who have been around for hundreds of years who know how to build engines, and they're
sure,
making electric, right? So now Tesla's up to some really, really fierce competition, and they can no longer stand out with the innovation. So if
right.
they don't somehow innovate their customer centricity, then they're going to be in really big trouble really, really quick. Do you
That's a
agree with
fantastic
this?
example.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I would. That's a perfect analogy. I think that's the modern day Model T, and I mean, they were so successful building something absolutely new and something so innovative that I mean, I believe that the competition has a tough time catching up with them because they
Yeah.
built this brand, and I mean, that's you look around, and I was caught by surprise at some point. I look around, there's Teslas everywhere.
Yep.
Um, it's again, some people will prefer the more traditional way or the experience. It's a different experience.
Yeah.
So for me personally, I prefer the experience of the familiar with the dashboard and everything. And I would be I cannot imagine driving a car with just like a computer screen onto the side. But that's just me at this point.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Well, if you have like again, now we have Rivian, right?
Right. Yeah.
That for people who like pickup trucks or need a a vehicle, like a personal utility vehicle,
Hmm.
and Tesla wasn't really providing to their needs. They're taking
Right.
so long to put out their Cybertruck, and Rivian came in, and for people who want the electric experience but need utilities, it's fantastic, and they're
Absolutely.
blowing everybody away, right?
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a Tesla driver. It took me a minute to get used to the large computer screen, as you said, but
Right.
very quickly, that I think that the one thing that Musk understands is that we have essentially what is almost a symbiotic relationship with screens at this
Well,
point
yeah, for
as
sure.
humans,
No, that's
so
totally
we very quickly translate the experience that we have with our personal devices into that of the computer screen,
exactly.
so
Exactly.
it's different, but you get used to it so quickly at this point.
For sure, for sure, and of course, and that's where you go to the psychology of the consumer and so on. So there's, there's different mindsets, right? It's, I do personally envy the speed and the pickup of Teslas because
So
it's
fun.
just enviable. It's because of the innovation. It's such a different type of engine, and then it's really better for the environment, and there's so many different reasons, and on
Mhm.
top of being cool and just, that part, when more and more people get Teslas, it starts to detract from that, like being the first one and the
Right.
cool club, right?
Yeah.
But then there's so many other value propositions, and they are also thinking about, speaking of customer experience. I have a friend who showed me the features of his Tesla SUV, and they're thinking of different jobs to be done, and use cases, and they have a mode for camping, for example, which is,
Yeah.
I don't know how many outdoorsy people use Teslas for camping, but they've developed this heating mode and this kind of almost like a tent kind of like experience. They're thinking of all those different use cases.
Yeah, they still do have the mindset of following the expectations of the modern consumer, let's say, right? And I think that part is really cool. Again, like going back to our initial thing, I do. If I had a chance to give Tesla my feedback directly, I would just remind them that at some point the competition is going to get fierce.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
when it comes to how they serve their customers, we've
Mhm.
all started hearing some horror stories about Tesla is great until you have an issue. And then when you have an issue, you better pray to all the gods to get out of it because it's almost impossible to get things done with Tesla. So that's one thing that I feel is going to start being a problem if they don't begin to understand that they're no longer the only ones, that their initial value prop is becoming commoditized and customers do have a choice, right?
Absolutely.
And if you work for Zappos, so that is as commoditized as can be, right? So in wrapping up this conversation, how is it that you, in your job on a daily basis, you feel you make a difference in customers' lives?
Absolutely, Mary. Yeah, so that your very, very insightful comment about Tesla, but it applies to any company. It applies
Mhm.
to Apple, to any company, and I think that's where the realization of the fact that you're dealing with people comes to play when things go wrong and when you have to deal with people, and that's where customer service comes into play, and that's the reason Zappos is what Zappos is nowadays, is because of this counterintuitive approach by Tony Hsieh and the founding leadership team, that they decided to differentiate by excellent customer service. They said people can buy shoes anywhere, but we're going to offer excellent customer service. And 22 years ago, this was revolutionary. And for many companies, it is even nowadays, right? It still is revolutionary to say we're going to invest in this area where most companies try to cut the cost, and then the result is really horrible customer experience. But that's where customer empathy comes in. That's where this focus comes in. And I mean, Tony used to say that Zappos is a customer service company that happens to sell shoes. Now we're in a different, the brand keeps evolving. And now our current CEO, Scott Schaefer, he has evolved and built on that statement. And now, according to him, Zappos is a customer experience company that happens to sell shoes. So it's a bit broader. It includes the digital experiences, and it includes everything in addition to just customer service. But it's this, I think one of the biggest opportunities is to bring this spirit of customer service, the in-person customer service, to the digital experiences, and then to scale that empathy. And I, like you said, your company is doing that, and I believe it can be done through software. It's how it's done. It's emulating. Of course, you cannot replace a human, but you can emulate to a certain point. And it's about an interchange. It's not about a chatbot. This is a stupid, technology first approach. Say we're going to use chatbots, and then you're like, well, how are we going to use chatbots exactly? But instead to say we need an exchange. I need to, when you reach out, first we have a problem, and the chatbot or whatever Clippy, right, says, Mary, first of all, it has to say two things. I'm really sorry that you're experiencing this, regardless. And then secondly, I'll fix it for you. And then they have to fix it. Yeah. And then you're going to have a very empathetic Clippy, right? Not just, spitting out pre-programmed messages,
Yeah. I think that the big problem is that a lot of really brilliant people inside organizations don't really understand that chatbots are just programmed. They're just variables. So, you have like a little option tree, and, if this, then that, if this, then that, if this, then that, if this, then that. And that, it's helpful in some situations, but when the person's having a problem, then it just adds to frustration, and anyway, don't get me started on chatbots but Alex, I know that you speak. I know that you write books, that you have a lot of opinions, and I think that a lot of our listeners would really be fascinated with. And how can people follow you or hear from you or read more about what you do?
Thank you, Mary. LinkedIn is probably my preferred platform of choice to connect with people. Everybody's on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
In a professional capacity. And then you mentioned we did write a book about these thoughts and these approaches with two co-authors. One is a neuroscience PhD turned market researcher. He does all the brain stuff that's way over my head, because you do need to work with numbers and you need to segment people in a meaningful way. And then Fernando Cabestany, who's the designer and also kind of the brand strategist behind the book and so on. So it's called Forget the Customer, See the Person. Mm-hmm. And it's self-published on Amazon. But thank you for this plug.
That's awesome. Well, I thank you for your time, and thank you for coming here today to share your views, share your experience with our listeners and viewers. And to everybody who is watching or listening in your car, wherever, thank you so much for sticking with us. Alex, it was a pleasure. I hope to have you on here again soon and continue our conversations.
Pleasure was all mine, Mary. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Voices of CX podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Worthix. Discover your worth with the Customer Value Alignment Platform. We're helping the world's biggest brands align with their true customer value. Learn more at worthix.com. Episodes are produced and edited by myself, Steve Barry, and Ashley Alufahai. See you on the next episode.